Well, hope everyone's having a great week, and we're diving into the next book in the Pentateuch, the book of Numbers. Probably like Leviticus, it's not the most often read book in the Pentateuch, but I think you'll find that there's some great deal of content in here that is worth knowing about. The book of Numbers is really a fascinating book because it tells different stories of the Israelite journey. A lot of these stories we've heard about, we know, but if somebody were to ask, hey, where's that story in the Bible? We probably wouldn't be able to guess right away. But, you know, one of the most famous things is they talk about the Nazirite vow. And we don't talk about that too often unless we're talking about Samson. Samson was a Nazirite, and that's why the whole deal with his hair and not touching unclean animals was so important, because in Numbers, Moses outlines what that is all about. Also in Numbers, you have the tabernacle being dedicated. This is a huge moment for the priests, for Aaron, who's the high priest, of dedicating this unto God. It was an act of worship. It was a way where they could just really come together and worship God. It was a time where the priestly code was really solemnized. It started in Leviticus, but then in the book of Numbers, Moses outlines more what the priestly code is going to be. What is the function of the priests? And all the priests flow from Aaron, so it's the Levitical tribe, the Levite tribe, which Moses was a part of. So you get that. And in that code, you also really learn a key theme for the church, which is that of spiritual authority. There's a story in Numbers where Aaron and Miriam were not happy with Moses. Most of their frustration centered around the fact that Moses married somebody who was not a Hebrew. And they weren't happy, and they spoke out against their leader in a very divisive, mean way. And although Aaron was protected to an extent because he was the high priest, Miriam probably got leprosy or some sort of skin disease, this word says, for 7 days, and then she was healed of it. And a lot of people have built this principle of spiritual authority around that, to where when you go against God's anointed one, when you go against the one that God has put in authority, you're removing yourself from the covering that authority provides. And so doctrines have really been built on that. And some doctrines of spiritual authority perhaps go too far. Some preachers maybe say too much about, I am the anointed one, you must do what I... And that's not really the context of this. It's a biblical principle of honoring God and honoring those that God has put before you. Spiritual authority is not a system where you can't ask questions. It's not a system where you can't disagree. I've had different men and women in my life that have been my spiritual authority that I've disagreed with. And privately, I may have a conversation with them and ask them, but publicly, I'm showing my support. I am affirming them. I'm building unity and harmony. Miriam and Aaron were not doing that. And so we need to recognize that. It was also in Numbers where the Passover truly began to become celebrated. And that's huge because we still celebrate Passover today. You know, when we recognize our moment of salvation, that's Passover. When we recognize Jesus, going to the cross, He was our Passover lamb, we're celebrating that feast. And those are key moments for our lives. Another part of Numbers that's always of interest is this is when the spies go into the promised land and they see the giants, perhaps those that look like the Nephilim from Genesis. And we discussed that some back in the week on Genesis and what the Nephilim may have been. But we see the spies, we see the journey from Kadesh all the way up through the Transjordan, because when we leave Numbers and go to Deuteronomy, the Israelites are positioned on the eastern bank of the Jordan River, most likely just to the northeast of the Dead Sea, which is eventually where Moses is buried there on Mount Nebo. Moses, as you know, does not go into the Promised Land, but he has them encamped there. That's where he most likely writes the Torah, the Pentateuch. That's where he writes Deuteronomy, which we'll talk about next week, and gives those messages. But it is there where so many things take place in teaching. One other part of Numbers that I think is worth discussing is just an interesting story of one of the camp meetings where all of a sudden all these venomous and poisonous snakes show up. People are getting bit and dying. They don't know what to do. So Moses, he takes this pole, this tower basically, and erects a bronze snake and puts on it. So you have all these venomous snakes everywhere, and then Moses puts this big snake, this bronze snake, up on this pole, and what he says is anyone who looks on that snake won't be hurt. The snakes won't get you. To me, that's just crazy. It worked. God's awesome. God's got miracles. But we don't really fully understand what that means until we get to the book of John. John chapter 3, Nicodemus is having a conversation with Jesus. And of course, it's in that discussion that we hear that great passage of John 3:16, "For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son." In the context of that message with Nicodemus, who was a Pharisee, an individual who knew the law, who knew the Torah, who knows the Pentateuch, Jesus talks about Moses erecting that pole that has a bronze snake on it. And that is what brings deliverance. Now, Nicodemus would have understood the context, but it wouldn't have been fulfilled until Nicodemus was in the crowd on that day that Jesus was put on that pole. And that pole was lifted up. And he saw Jesus there. And I believe for Nicodemus, something changed in his heart and in his mind that day. Because when he saw Jesus on that pole, all of a sudden he became a passionate believer. He was one of the ones with Joseph of Arimathea that went and asked for the body of Christ so that he could properly bury him. That burial was key. Because without the tomb, without the burial of Jesus, how would we know of a true resurrection? Most individuals that were put on a cross, they were criminals. And they were just thrown into a valley of Gehenna to be rotted, to be burned, and for that body just to decay. But the fact that there was a tomb, a place where Jesus was laid and He is no longer there, shows the miracle. So Nicodemus was key to that story. Nicodemus understood this. And for us, church, friends, class, if you're a preacher, here's your preaching point on this one. When you look at the Son of Man who was lifted up onto that cross, you're healed and you're set free. Just like the Israelites, when they looked at that bronze snake, they were healed and they were set free. Enjoy the book of Numbers. If you need anything this week, send me an email, give me a call. I'm here to support you. You guys are doing a great job. I'm proud of you. We've only got a few more weeks left, so keep it going strong. And hey, jump into the discussion thread, give some comments and thoughts, challenge one another, get to know each other more, and have a great week.